Well, the Democrats have an actual viable presidential candidate running, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. If you haven't heard the news, apparently they have decided they do not want to have any presidential debates. I wonder why. Now, I actually like the guy. He's not my first choice for president, but I do like him. And if he ended up winning the election, I wouldn't be upset.
So you are, of course, being dismissed as a vaccine nut, but watching your announcement today, it wasn't about pharma even so much as it was about America's place in the world and what do we do about it. If you wouldn't mind summarizing for our viewers where you think we are and what you think we ought to do.
Well, I gave a long speech, Tucker, and thank you again for having me on.
Of course.
And for that very kind of an introduction.
Now, obviously, he's got issues with his vocals. And you see that in his body language because he struggles to get all of that out. So you're going to see a lot more facial stress. You'll see a lot more body stress, especially in the chest area and in the neck. So all of that we will have to dismiss.
I think that the general theme of my speech was this corrupt merger of state and corporate power, which is turning our country into a corporate kleptocracy, into a system of socialism for the rich, and this kind of a cushy socialism for the rich, and this kind of brutal, merciless capitalism for the poor. It keeps us in a state of war. It bails out banks at the same time that last month, the United States.
So you see him get comfortable in that. You're watching him speak. He's blinking a lot, but I'm going with the stress of the talking. So this would be kind of a norm thing. These are the things that we'll have to throw out as tells because it would just be his baseline. He's not doing much of a brain search as he goes through. This is all in RAM. He does have an emotional tie to that, as we saw just a little bit ago. And that is the only real search we do see. And it's basically how this country is working, like a kleptocracy.
States government told 30 million people it was cutting their their food stamp checks by 90%. It took 15 million people off of Medicare.
By 90%, you see the believe me look, like that's huge for him. So in his mind, that is massive, 90% cut in food stamps. It's the most important thing.
The same month, it gave $300 million to the Silicon Valley Bank and tapped up the cost of the Ukraine war to $113 billion. We're sending $113 billion to the Ukraine.
So as he talks on that, you see him talk with his hands, his honest thing on the Ukraine. We spent $113 billion, Ukraine. And then he folds one arm underneath to prop up the other one. And it's kind of like, this might be a mix of that struggle, the stress of talking. It can tire someone out. Although he's been doing it for a while, he's probably built up some endurance to it.
The entire budget of EPA is $12 billion. The budget of CDC is $11 billion. We have 57% of American citizens could not put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency.
And then you've got the Bernie Sanders finger. It's the Bernie Sanders finger.
A quarter of our citizens are hungry. So we're cutting welfare and food stamps by 90%. And we're bailing out the bankers. We're paying for a war that, we can't afford. And with the way that we do this is by printing money. We've printed.
So you see that, after he says we can't afford, his emphasis. Usually when you see this kind of behavior from an interviewee, they're looking for some kind of reciprocation from the interviewer. Like, yeah, you've got a point there, or I agree with you, or no, I don't agree with you. And Tucker gives him nothing. So that's why you hear the because it's like, well, I thought I gave a good point. He gives me nothing back. Now I have to try and something else to throw at you to say, look, I'm making a good point.
10 centuries of money in the last 14 years. And that caused the inflation, which raises food, which is a tax on the poor. Oh, we've raised food prices for basic foods like chicken, dairy, and milk by 76% in the last 2 years. And now we're cutting people's food stamps and bailing out banks the same month. It doesn't make any sense. And we need to get rid of this kind of corporate control of our government. It comes from our democracy is devolving into kind of a corporate plutocracy.
I would think that what you just said, and I'll just be honest, I agree with most of it. But even if I didn't, I would think, boy, that's a really interesting thing to say. You have a coherent worldview. You've written a lot of books on these topics. You've clearly thought about it. You're not in it for the money. So don't these issues deserve a wide hearing before the public entering a presidential year? It seems to me that they do.
I would think they would, and particularly the issues of war. And, you know, my son went over and fought in the Ukraine, as I said today. I think people, the major doy.
My son went over to fight in the Ukraine. He's a mercenary. I mean, that's what it is. If you come from another country to go fight for another country, you're a mercenary. And there's no extra stress in that. There's nothing. My son went to go fight. It's just a fact that is put out there. And that would be where I would worry, because it's like, ugh. I don't know how I feel about that.
Sort of diplomatic, the most respected diplomatic gurus like Henry Kissinger and Jack Matlock and Larry Wilkinson have all said the Ukraine war is a huge problem for our country because from a geopolitical standpoint, it's driving the Russians close to the Chinese, which is the worst thing for us. But we're there for the right reasons because we have tremendous compassion for the Ukrainian people and the illegal invasion, the brutality, and also their valor and their courage. My own son was serving over there. He joined a special forces unit as a machine gunner. He fought in the Kharkiv offensive. Americans care about the underdog. They care about that kind of suffering. But the question is, why are we in the Ukraine? Because Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, said that we're there to exhaust the Russians. President Biden has said that we're there to deplatform, to depose Vladimir Putin. And if that's why we're there, and we're killing a lot of Ukrainians as pawns in a proxy war between two great powers. Here's one last thing I would say. Nobody talks about this. There's 14,000 Ukrainian civilians who have died, but 300,000 troops. The Russians are killing Ukrainians at a 7-to-1 to 8-to-1 ratio. They cannot sustain this. What we're being told about this war is just not true.
No, it's not true. And I would hope, despite the fact you criticize their advertisers, other media outlets would have enough respect for our country and for its voters to give what you said a hearing, because I think it's really important. And we're, again, grateful that you came on our show tonight. You're always welcome. Bobby Kennedy Jr., thank you.
Thank you very much, Tucker.
He's not a bad guy. I just don't agree with his worldview on how things work. I guess my thought process, if you actually believe something and you're willing to stand for what you believe, you're a good person in my book. Unless you're a Satanist, then you're not.
If you like it, please share and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
If you'd like to learn more about analysing body language, there is a video course available on Mandy's website for Gold subscribers.